So I was fortunate enough to take the ECS 410 assessment and evaluation class this past semester. And through the class, I was able to develop a completely new philosophy around assessment and evaluation. To begin, I started out going into the class not ever building any assessments, not knowing how to make them, not knowing their importance. I went in not knowing quite a bit. And initially, I thought that assessment was all about, here's a paper, here's a pencil, here's the questions, complete this assessment, and then I'm going to give you a grade on it. I knew that assessment had to be related to the outcomes and indicators. If they weren't reflective of those, then you're wasting your time. Assessment should be valid and reliable. I took an EPSI class a while ago, kind of about assessment. It had to do more of diagnostic assessments, but we talked a little bit about validity and reliability in regards to tests, and I feel like that helped me a little bit in this class going in. Tests, I believe, had to have a grade or mark attached to them, so the only reason you would take an assessment or give an assessment is to receive a grade. So these grades would go towards the student's overall mark of the course, and that's how they would determine if the student is fit to pass the class and move on, or they need to stay back and do some more practicing. I knew that there were 3 types of assessment, so I knew about diagnostic, and then I knew about formative, and then I knew about summative. With these, I understood that diagnostic was like a pre-test to see what your students know and what your students don't know. I knew that there was no grade usually attached to those ones. Formative has been kind of one that I've always struggled with a little bit, because I never know when you want to attach a grade to them and when you don't. But that's more in general testing. It's not summative at all, meaning it's kind of based on like little learnings, like maybe throughout one class. And then summative, I knew was like a cumulative test through a unit or a semester of what the students learned, and those are taken in for grades. So looking back on this information, a lot of what I assumed and thought I knew is not exactly true. So throughout the semester, I guess, to begin, I still believe that assessment needs to be relevant to the outcomes and indicators, because if they're not, I'm not really sure what the purpose of doing the assessment is. There would be no goal to that, so always make sure your assessment is relevant to the outcome and indicators. To follow on that, one strong component I learned through this class was when creating a rubric, you have to make sure every single point you have in that rubric has a purpose. So when you're having students do a presentation and you have a component in your rubric such as creativity, that's not in the outcomes and indicators of any subject. Well, maybe art, but let's say you're having them do a science fair project and you have creativity or visually appealing or something to do with how the poster is set up and created. If they're doing a poster, you cannot mark them on that, because that's not in the curriculum for that subject. Like, you can't, and who's to determine, how are you to determine what is creative and what is not? So for me, creative could be they're using lots of color, wow, that's so creative. And for you, it could be, oh, they drew a picture, that's really creative. But they don't know there's no baseline as to what creative is. They can't follow that to be successful. So that's a main thing I realized. And same within rubrics while we're on that topic. The other thing is, it's not always the best to put 5 columns in a rubric, because when you're grading it, you're going to kind of lean towards the middle column when you're unsure, and that'll skew the person's marks, and they won't be representative of what the student had created. So assessments should really be transparent. It should be created with the student as much as possible, just so that everybody's on the same page and there's not misunderstandings happening that you don't know about. During this class, we actually did create one of our assessments together, like the criteria for the assignment together, and I think that really helped. I've never done that in a class before, and being able to see firsthand and put in my input about what I wanted to be graded on was really helpful, and it made the assignment not as dry. Like I didn't go into the assignment being like, oh, we have to do this and this and this because that's what's required. It's like, well, we decided on what was required, so it kind of pushed me a little more to do well in the assignment just because I knew what exactly I had to do well. So that's something I really want to use with my future students, whether it's building a rubric or even just building success criteria. I'd like to involve them as much as possible so that we all know what's going on with the assignment, what they need to do to be successful, and then if they have any questions or anything, it's just good to clear that up before they start the assignment. Another important piece is always give the assignment criteria or rubric at the beginning of the assignment, because it's not fair if students understand it differently, start working on the assignment, and then realize that, oh, now that I've received the rubric, I'm not on the right track. So give the rubric or assessment criteria with lots of time ahead so that students can actually go through that and figure out what they need to do. So assessments do have to be valid and reliable. If they're not, there's no point in doing them. They should be authentic, relatable to the curriculum, so the outcomes and indicators. They should be transparent, so going in, you shouldn't be trying to trick your students. I know some teachers think it's, like they're making students use deeper knowledge when they put in kind of trick questions, but that's not a fair assessment at all. So even with multiple choice, I can remember an experience I've had in university where the prof said every single question was multiple choice. However, within the multiple choice, there was more than one right answer on many of the questions. We didn't know which questions they were. And to get the answer right, you had to pick the answer that was most correct. So if you picked an answer that was correct, but didn't pick the most correct answer, you got that question wrong. So that was really tricky, I think, and I didn't learn anything from those exams. I was just frustrated and didn't really know what he wanted from us. So they need to be fair and equitable. Timely. You don't want to give assessments that are hours and hours long. Just because the assessment is long doesn't mean that the student is learning more or deserves more of a grade. You can give an assessment that can be worth 10 marks that can take 10 minutes, and you can give an assessment that can be worth 10 marks that can take an hour. It's completely up to you on how you want to do that. You have to kind of base that on the ability of your class. So if you are an older grade and students do need to start practicing writing exams for post-secondary, you might want to make the tests a little longer, but you're not going to give a 7-year-old a test that takes an hour long. That's not ideal. Also, assessments need to be incremental. So you're not giving a test every single day at the end of every single class. That's not how assessments are supposed to be used. Assessments are supposed to be used periodically so that they feel like an assessment. It's not like, oh, here's another one of these that I got to do today. It doesn't really count for anything. They have to have a purpose and they have to be timely. They have to be incremental. One big difference that I learned this semester is that there is a difference between assessment and evaluation. So assessment focuses on learning, teaching, and outcomes. So when you're giving an assessment, the overall purpose of giving an assessment is to increase the quality of one's work. So you are giving them feedback, you are showing them where they went right, where they went wrong, what they could have done differently. so that the next time when they talk about this assessment, or when they talk about the topic that was assessed, they're going to have better knowledge on what they should be talking about. Evaluation, on the other hand, focuses on grades, so that's where the marks come in. This is where people can determine whether you, or judge whether you pass or fail a class, and evaluation is around one judging the quality of one's work. I actually saw a picture online that explained it really well, and there's a man standing beside a flower, and to assess the flower, he's giving it some water and he's saying, oh, this water will help you get taller. And then it shows to the flip side where it's the same man and he's standing over a flower, and it's the evaluation portion, and he's looking at the flower and he's not doing anything, but he's saying, well, you need to be taller. So assessment, you can see that they're pushing the learning on the student, trying to get them more successful, whereas evaluation, they're just judging and not giving any feedback. So how do we know that a student understands and is able to do something? This is where assessment works really well. So one thing that I personally found through my pre-internship experience that I like to use to check students' understanding is formative assessments. So a lot of the time I found that formative assessments weren't taken seriously because students think that they're not taken in for marks. I would tell them they are, and then I would put them as an overall participation mark. So if they handed in their formative assessment at the end of the semester, they would get however many out of 10 for participation. So if I used 10 formative assessments during the semester, then they would get 10% if they did them all. So it's not about telling, oh, this isn't for grades, so like just do the best you can, because a lot of students won't. They'll just hand it in and leave. So through formative assessment, I was able to give students questions on cue cards or exit slips, and then see what they know through those questions, so I can base my next lessons on what I still need to teach them, or what I need to go over again, or move on to new subjects, stuff like that. So I found formative assessments really helpful. I guess backtracking to diagnostic assessments, those during my pre-internship I used at the beginning. So when we started the unit, like on the very first day, I kind of asked them what they knew about the topic, what they wanted to know. KWL charts fill in really well for diagnostic assessment, and those can also be used throughout the entire course. So KWL, what I know, what I want to know, and what I've learned. So those, just keeping track, those can help a lot. Summative assessment, I did that through an assignment, and it was interesting. It was really interesting to see which students pulled certain things out of the curriculum and which did not. So it was the same assignment for 60 kids, and some of them did really well and really applied their knowledge that they learned, and some of them didn't. But with the success criteria, we created it together, and we were all on the same page. So it's just very interesting to see which students can kind of go about that differently. One thing that I have to remember when giving assessments is that everyone does learn differently. So if I wanted to give an assessment, it might not be the same assessment for everyone. An example of this is when I talked about kind of fair versus equal. So being equal would be giving everybody the exact same test and expecting them to fill it out the exact same. So they would all be given a piece of paper with questions, and they would all get a pencil, and that's what they would do. That's how they were assessed. Being fair, however, that would more rely on kind of helping students where they need help. So if you had a student who didn't have hands, you're not going to give them a paper and a pencil and say, here, write this essay for this exam like everybody else. You might have them do a video, you might have them do a skit, you might have them have a conversation with you. You can do it in different ways that makes it fair, which can benefit a student a lot. So going back to even the example picture that I've seen, where it's a row of animals, and they're saying, okay, we're giving you guys an equal test. Everybody's having an equal opportunity to do this test. And there's like a fish and a snake and a monkey and a giraffe, and he says, climb that tree over there. How's the fish gonna climb the tree? That's not fair. That's equal, but it's not fair. So just remembering to be fair when giving assessments. One downfall to this could be it might take a lot of time. So because everyone's different, I might have to give out 3, 4, 5 different assessments, and that's going to be hard on me as a teacher, because then I have to go and correct all these assessments when they're not in the same way. Like if you had a test that was just true or false, you could go and look at the answer key, okay, true, false, true, false, just go through that. But by having different assessments, you're looking for different things. So that can be a lot more time consuming in that way. So it's just something I need to be aware of. It's commonly said that assessment should only occur at the end of a semester or learning periods or unit. I don't believe this, because formative assessment does have a lot of practical components to it, and that's just a really good way to monitor students as they go along. Rewrites on assessments are not appropriate. I don't believe that either. So life happens. A student can rewrite an exam to show how they've learned and how they've grown, whereas if you give them an evaluation and they write it and they fail horribly, and then you don't give them any feedback, you don't talk to them about it, it's just like, okay, you failed it, moving on now, they're not going to learn through that. So allowing students to rewrite assessments gives them the opportunity to like expand their growth and their deeper understanding of what the topic actually is. I do not believe that all assessments should be used for marks, just because there's ways to assess students without doing it formally, so through group discussion. And you don't have to give students marks for that go towards their overall grade. This is just a check for understanding. Yeah, so I've learned quite a bit this semester, and I think going into my internship, I have a lot of new tools that I can use to assess my children that I'll have, my students that I'll have. I really want to promote differentiated assessment during my internship, just because I know that I've benefited from that before, and I want my students to be able to benefit from that as well. I need to remember I might not always have access to resources I need to differentiate the assessment, but that is something I'll just have to work through and discuss with my students. I think the main thing that I'm taking away from this class is how important it is to collaborate with your students and with other teachers. So when you're like, I'm a new teacher, I'm going in and I'm not going to know anything. So just being able to rely on other people and have those people for support, hear my students out, what they need to know, what they want to know, is just going to help me a lot through my teaching career. So overall, I've learned a lot through this class, and I'm looking forward to creating rubrics and getting them assessed by my peers so that I can just keep growing and learning about assessment and evaluation. Thanks.